The floor is kind of busy. It's made in a rather busy way. Your frocks will snag all the time. No, all the time. So you might just as well get used to the fact that you'll have shredded ends.
A shredded end or a distinguished beginning. For the first night audience, it's all the same. What we've just seen is the end of a process, one that's been going on for 3 years, to bring Dame Janet Baker together with Scottish Opera for their first appearances at the Aix-en-Provence Festival. It's been planned for 3 years, but they've only had 3 weeks to do the donkey work.
It is what's known as a low-profile budget. I mean, you're lucky, actually, you're not in bathing costumes, because that's what we were almost reduced to. And with very few of you, I mean, it's going to be a sort of quick change show. It's going to be like a review. We've really kind of worked it out terribly carefully that like 6 of you go off after one scene and change wildly into witches and come back while the next lot are changing into witches. I mean, it has got to be very carefully organised. The organisation, actually, is the thing that's going to take more time almost than the interpretation.
Normally, on a new production, a producer would have at least 3 weeks rehearsal before the opening night, even although it was a small one-actor like Dido. John Copley, in fact, has only 1 week for this production. And in this week, he has lost the chorus for 3 days because of a prior television engagement for the chorus. He doesn't have all the principals all of the time, and he doesn't have the orchestra at all, because the Scottish Chamber Orchestra is the orchestra in residence in Aix.
So it's an act of faith. Faith in the performers, faith in the professionalism of all concerned, and above all, faith in the charisma of Dame Janet Baker, their Dido. As far as Dame Janet is concerned, John Copley has worked with her before, and his faith in that direction is absolute. If anything should go wrong there, the whole show will flop.
I'm missing her terribly at the moment because I actually create a tremendous amount around her. She's really the jewel, and I make a setting that really, sets her off. And at the moment, I'm frightfully busy creating a sort of setting without actually the jewel in the middle of it. I mean, I know the minute she comes that it actually will just simply take off because she just has that genius, especially in these times.
So he's working under very severe pressure this week.
You've got to start right off there. Now, Dido and Aeneas should be coming now. See them. Huge bows and curtsies. That's more like it.
The foundations of the production were laid appropriately enough in the engineers' halls in Glasgow, far away from the scene of Dido's action in Carthage, but full of character and with a lively acoustic.
You can always do it the minute you walk in the joint. No, you've got to be aware of them, haven't you, before you sing, don't you think? See them there, going in their great thing. Were you going to be down or up?
Well, I was down before, but I've never speared it, right?
Well, just put your spear down.
So you break out of it completely, thank you. And you do the same with... Right. And just stop and just watch.
Unlike many works in the operatic repertoire, Dido and Aeneas is simple enough to follow. That's the problem, really. The willing suspension of disbelief, so beloved of producers, is that much harder to create. The action is so simple, the music so austere, that the producer's lot is not that easy. Animate the static, imply what's not there. The understudy's lot in this piece is not all that happy either. Linda Ormiston had the unenviable task of understudying Dame Janet Baker, of waiting for the chance and hoping, perhaps, that it would never come.
All right, now look, I tell you, it is going to work, but what has to happen? Do you know what has to happen? Is that I think by the time you've got to the middle, it's perfectly clear that she's not entertained. And I think that you should start doing it as you're dancing to each other. It should be very clear that she is distracted.
On that way back.
Yes, because there's no point in actually doing all this if she's miles away. And she's actually got down here in a great old state.
Everyone in this production got into a great old state. Limited time caused many problems, especially in wardrobe.
A normal new production, we would have the costumes being altered right the way up to the first night. After every rehearsal, there would be little changes to be made here, there, and everywhere. Here, we've got to get the costumes virtually finished as we can get them, by Saturday, because on Sunday, we then have to get everything out of the rehearsal room, into one of our wagons, sealed by the customs, and sent over to Aix. That means that we're going to have to take our costume supervisor over with us and get the help of quite a number of seamstresses in Aix to finish all the costumes off.
And it's here that the story really begins. How do you say seamstress in French? And what do you do if there isn't a seamstress when you get there? Dido and Aeneas is above all about the interference of fate in the lives of mortals. When monarchs unite, how happy their state. They triumph at once o'er their foes and their fate, sing the chorus. But is it really like that in real life?
Now get the point. She's trying to, as she comes over, watch her. So rich. So rich. Can you turn to her? No, the other way. That's it. Fine. We must have an enjoyment.
Still not much enjoyment in wardrobe, though. And they're still trying to pull threads together from all over the place. Everything has to be listed, detailed, and packed for customs and transportation.
Can you check with Alex when the headdresses are coming up from London? Because if they don't come up before Saturday, we're in a bit of trouble.
Now you should start dishing out the wine to the these horns. Now they aren't drinking vessels, so I have a feeling that you're all wearing them the wrong way to drink. Shouldn't they be worn?
With the fat end out.
Yes, if you're going to drink out of them, they should be that way. Absolutely, yeah.
Are we going to be able to take this out?
It is rude, isn't it? Oh, God. Could you go over and fill his horn? You go over there.
Any opera, but particularly this one, is a fragile edifice. And for what? Unlit props remind us that the best efforts end up standing about like junk. And yet the sight of dead scenery doesn't seem to deter. The show goes on, because it must, because it will.
We do quite a lot of touring abroad, but there have always in the past been of shows which we've had in the repertoire. So you have time to make a complete inventory of everything that you need. For Dido, we're having to prepare the customs inventory cold. That means that every piece of scenery, every prop, every piece of every costume must be inventorized in complete detail, ready for the customs man on Sunday. But this is extremely difficult on a new production because every day, as you may have seen in the rehearsals, things are changing. So we're hoping that we've got a fairly benevolent customs man when it comes to get out on Sunday.
When the cake called a customs man was baked, utterly reliable benevolence wasn't always part of the mix. A soft-heartedness and the duties of the excise man are often, by their very nature, mutually exclusive. And so when the scenery was eventually sealed up to be moved away to Aix, it was more or less with a hope and a prayer that all would go well. From here on, Scottish opera's new baby was left indeed to the vagaries of fate. The scenery had to make it to Aix in just 2 days. A single delay, a puncture, a major breakdown, and the whole project could be jeopardized at the outset. So how did John Copley feel at this stage that things had gone?
Well, it's not quite as hideous as I thought it was going to be. I was in Canada last week doing Midsummer Night's Dream, and I had this terrible fright when I got a letter saying that the Scottish company were actually doing 3 days of a gala television in the middle of this first week's rehearsal. And we were already actually starting 4 days later than originally planned because they suddenly had extra performances somewhere in the north of Scotland. I can't actually pronounce the name. But, I mean, I had an absolute fit because this is a frightfully difficult piece to do. And I actually haven't done it before. And I felt that I needed every moment not experiment. I'm sort of a professional director, but, you know, when you do a piece for the first time, it's quite different from something that you actually are accustomed to.
This Dido was about firsts for everyone. Technical controller John Duffers had worked in Germany and Poland, but never with the caprices of the French telephone system. And although he still had his troubles here in Glasgow, at least the scenery was safely off to Aix-en-Provence. In the south of France, everything was still going well. What they didn't know was that the plot was thickening. As far as anyone from Scottish opera was concerned, Aix was still to be looked forward to. A charming Romanesque town of warm sun, cool markets, the archetypal town of Provence, redolent of the Romans. And with it, the essential part of every Roman town, a theatre. In an archbishop's palace. By now, John Duffers has arrived to personally supervise the getting. That means even more phone calls. What Duffers has just discovered is that the scene truck is missing. Things are going to get worse before they get better. An opera production is not only a stack of cards, it's also a large ball. And once it's set rolling, there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. The scenery might have gone missing, but the cast hadn't. They arrived in Marseille on a typical Mediterranean midday. They'd come in from Paris on the last leg of their journey, wined, dined, looking forward to drinking in more of the atmosphere.
Eddie Aidley Jr., please. Eddie, it's John here. Hi, you got my message earlier on. We're now 2¼ hours overdue. No. The reason I was ringing is to try and find out if you've got the route they were taking and the exit off the autoroute, the motorway, because I've got Brian going round in his car in the town. I've got the police looking for them, and we still haven't had any word. And we know that STV and their vehicles passed them yesterday. They passed them yesterday and they were well on their way. There should have been no reason why they couldn't have got here last night. Oh, sure, yeah. Hang on a second. Could somebody tell me where you passed the vehicles? Villefranche. How far away is that? 200 miles. It's about a couple of 100 miles away. And that was when? Lunchtime yesterday. So there was tons of time. And I know both drivers, if they'd broken down, would have got to a phone.
At this point, the company might have been forgiven for thinking that their efforts to arrive in some style had been cursed. The usual airport wait for luggage became a bit too long. Had something gone wrong with the baggage? Should they open the duty-free? Is that the Med out the window? Isn't it hot? Will it get hotter? It will indeed.
Scottish Opera spends years negotiating and organising a marvellous tour with great British efficiency, and it all goes wrong, and you get French baggage men going on strike at the last minute.
I've rung Glasgow. No messages gone in there. I've also rung the residence. No messages there. So as far as they're concerned, they're on schedule.
Well, Brian's been round.
He's come round in the car?
Yeah. When he left me here, he went straight down the road. A car and then some walking back up it. He must have been right round the block.
I don't know what we can do, but just wait.
Just wait. They had to. However, the patron saint of baggage carousels was just being a bit capricious that day, and some sharp-eyed soul spotted his suitcase at an adjacent bay. And so, with some relief, they didn't know they'd no scenery. The cast began to consider France with a fresh eye. With the bags, the singers had got their throat lozenges, the dancers their athletic supports, and chance had had another go at their nerves. No one needed to be reminded of the precariousness of the schedule they'd undertaken. They were jolly, the sun shone, and a festival in the south of France beckoned alluringly. Meanwhile, the French police have found the scene truck. So where had it been?
Well, it started at Le Havre.
At Le Havre, yeah. And, well, the customs wouldn't let us through the first night. They held it until they checked on the carnet. And the Inspector General, the officer that was in charge there, hadn't the authority to let us through because the valuation of the load was too much. So they said then, we'll have to see the Inspector General in the morning. We went and seen him. He passed it okay after that, you know. Last night, after we'd run about 540 miles, about 150 kilometres, we felt a bit tired, so we stopped off in Orange last night. That was about 10:30.
Tried about 5 hotels. I walked very near a mile to 3 hotels because we couldn't just pull that up and anywhere and leave it, you know. It's like this small, like village, you know. And I walked up and down and complete. Everyone I walked, every hotel I walked into. We finally got one, didn't we?
The trouble now was how to get the truck to the theatre. Daniel Laurent, the French technical director, had to cope.
The language barrier has been very bad, you know, between the two. Try to translate, you know,
French.
The lorry drivers had successfully brought several tons of scenery and costumes across Britain, across the Channel, and across France. But now, one false move, one jackknife, could wreck the whole project. It took them half an hour to maneuver the 60-foot monster up the narrow streets and through a pedestrian zone. They had to get it in without wrecking the walls of the houses, or the parked cars, or even, perish the thought, the 13th century abbey itself. Wardrobe mistress Mary Jane Rayner is now faced with her own set of problems. Costumes half finished in the rush to get from Glasgow, and missing bits and pieces that everybody else thought that everybody else had thought of. Most of the cast had 3 costume changes, and difficulties in getting everything just right kept turning up. By the time everything was unpacked and all the omissions uncovered, opera in 3 weeks seemed a crazy idea.
Well, now we know why the hold-up occurred. French customs simply wouldn't let the wagon through. They complained about the value. The total value on this carney of about £6,500, and the official said that he wasn't authorised to let that sort of value of cargo through the customs, which meant that our boys had to spend the night in Le Havre. And yet they were letting through yachts worth something like £250,000, stamping and away. So that's why we're 3 hours late.
Je suis sûr que t'as dit sur la scène.
On the stage.
Et que ça veut dire à l'intérieur.
Sur la scène. Putain, mais il faut la couvrir, la scène, non? C'était une question.
Oui. C'est bon. Ouais, celui-là, tu les mets là au tas des pieds. Ok.
And all the time, the town of Aix-en-Provence slumbered on in the sun. It must have been strange for the Scots, so used to warm rain in summer, to find themselves constantly subjected to the searing heat of the south of France. And yet it's that makes the town such an attractive venue for an international festival of the arts. Imagine Edinburgh or Aldeburgh, so much more attractive on the Mediterranean. In its 30-year history, Aix has become one of the in venues on the international circuit, a must if you've got the money. The cool markets, the berry brown children, and the winsome stallholders, so ethnic and apparently uncommercialized, set the tourist, the Scots among them, reaching for money. Souvenirs, often edible, subtleties, frequently liquid, were all stashed away for the folks back home. And it was into this environment that the Scots had to fit. In just a few days, they had to come to terms with the heat, a stage crew who spoke no English, and the fact that they were really here and committed. Like any other French town, Aix bustles its way through most days in that busy Mediterranean way. People scoot about all over the place. Their police look as if they're out of one of those glamorous spy movies. Life whizzes by in living proof that French roads are part of the racing circuit of life. And in a broader sense, the operatic and the practical is embodied in the general scene. The flamboyance of the stage is part of the French lifestyle. This is what makes a French festival so French. The sounds and smells surrounding you, the ambience. There's that slightly reckless feeling about the place, the feeling that there's no work tomorrow. Although there is, but at least the weather's going to be nice. And that in its turn was a feeling which, to a large extent, inspired Scottish opera's visit in the first place. The only way it could be done was to attempt what was virtually impossible, and bring together the flower of English opera in Dido and Aeneas with a Scottish company and a Scottish orchestra. All this might seem to suggest that somebody somewhere has Scottish connections and is determined to exploit them. No chauvinism here, though. The Scottish connection is the brainchild of festival director Bernard Lafort.
I met Peter Hemming, who was in charge of the Scottish Opera in this time. He's now in Sydney. And we decided perhaps that we could do a sort of collaboration, very close, and sort of co-production of one opera. And we were looking for which one. And then Charles Mackerras told me, you know that Janet Baker never accepts to perform operas abroad, but perhaps for Aix, and if the rehearsal are in England or in Scotland, perhaps she would accept it, and she did. So it's an enormous pleasure for me, and we decided to do together a new production of Dido. And Janet Baker is singing Dido. And after that, I think that was not enough. And I decided to engage for that performance the Scottish Chamber Orchestra with a great revelation for us, because Charles Mackerras and Raymond Lepard told me that this chamber orchestra was very good. But it is more than very good. It's superb.
By now, everything and everyone had arrived. Just as they were getting used to being settled, it was time again for something else to go wrong. This time, it wasn't costumes or the shape of the stage, but the sound on stage. Much to their disquiet, the singers found they could hardly hear the orchestra.
Look, see that?
In this kind of quick-fire production, the last thing they needed really was a language problem. It was bad enough on a day-to-day basis, but in the highly technical world of the theatre, even the handy book of theatrical terminology didn't help with Provençal as she is spoke.
Appuie-le, appuie-le. Regarde là. Il y a tout gamin là.
Sir Charles Mackerras conducted conversation with anybody and everybody to achieve his own kind of harmony. With what was now a kind of ghastly inevitability, they realized that something else had gone wrong. The headgear wasn't ready yet. The complicated structures had each taken days to complete. Thousands of bits of copper and silver wire had to be welded together and then positioned with magnets. And there was this sinking feeling that they were not going to be ready in time. But they simply had to be. No excuses. Many costumes were made of plastic, rubber, muslin, and wire. And the cast, being human and hot, didn't like them.
Now let's get the lines from them. Now, look, who's in the... You two...
the edge of the rostra at the side, but behind Linda.
You should be behind Linda, that's it. So you two, and face absolutely en face. You must be absolutely en face. Anybody who's angled doesn't work. And you two don't work unless your faces are absolutely to the front. Can you move up a little bit, Harry? I'm going to change your first position. I don't think there's a possibility of you going all the way around. I think you've got to do my trusty elf from here, and then you can go. You know, you could go on hark, cry. It'll be better. There's just such a mess. Now let's get the lines here absolutely right.
The airlines had delayed the wig dresser in Paris. Now she was madly trying to straighten the wigs. Tearing her hair, you might say.
Now what we've been doing is we've been tucking some of this into the belt to try and keep it out of the way. Is that all right?
You're tucking what into the belt?
We're tucking this in here, putting this on, because when this opens up, you sometimes see this under it.
Very intelligent suggestion.
All right?
Yes.
Yes. The voices are all right.
The voices were okay, it was just we had only strings, really.
Oh, I see, fine. Let's do in a default until again. Here's 21.
Because that was a success. Now, can I just finish? Okay, this goes back straight now.
Don't forget practice, as the dame told us the other day. Too dreadful a practice.
We must hear the work a little bit, you see.
The strain was beginning to tell. The long hours, starting late and finishing later, were killing.
You're doing terribly well, don't panic. It's only another 6 hours. Oh, we've got to work till 5 in the morning. I was going to say, what a lovely, easy time you're having. Let's see how that is, darling.
Okay. Tag on the back of the black robe.
Can you put his name on
So you can identify it in the dark.
We all want a tape.
So we know which is ours.
I end up with somebody who's 6'4" every time, darling. Wait till you see it.
It's not just
This comes on. And then
we never go so.
Banish sorrow, banish care. The two ballet boys should go upstage centre as the chorus move in. Harry and Andy. So we've got a line of torches at the back.
The other Dido in Aix was Jeanne Rode, a splendid French mezzo renowned for her dramatic abilities. However, she had language difficulties and never quite came to terms with the music.
You don't want to see the face, but if you put another layer of this, it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
But on top of that...
Meanwhile, backstage, Peter Ebert, Scottish Opera's general administrator, was called in to smooth out some of designer Stefan Lazaridis' difficulties. Ebert, at this late stage, had to persuade the designer that the artistic and the practical could indeed be satisfactorily reconciled.
In that particular scene, when Janet sings, thing, I wept buckets, the first time. And I'm sure we're going to do it. Janet's lament at the end, and I'm sure, we're going to need this because the mascara will begin to hear about it, It's so beautiful.
Let's do the last 4 bars of Pursue Thy Conquest, Pursue Thy
Graham,
Conquest, love.
the entrance a fraction sooner with the spears.
Yes, and please watch people. 1, 2, bop, 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 so that it really comes together.
Must be not tentative at all.
Must be really very vital. That. Pursue Thy Conquest, Pursue Thy Conquest. 1.
Is it?
It's nice when they do that. Pool of light on them and just Belinda.
Well, that's what I said to Bob. We just want a light on them at the moment.
And Belinda.
And downstage. I would have thought if there's a backlight that would actually really pick up the effigy, that would be really nice. Listen, you said somebody had gone for some drinks. Are they bringing it? Because really, somebody must get us drinks. We've been here, all while. It's 7:15 and nobody's given us a drink. She's a very ballsy woman, I think. I like her, I must say. She's a ballsy woman. She's got guts.
Like those black and white shoes.
He's got extraordinary legs, that boy. Is that the wardrobe girl? What's her name? Owls. What's her name? Nice one. Mary Jane. That looks all right in the frock. She'd be surprised. It does, actually.
It doesn't mean anything.
What?
Why do they dance suddenly?
It's called a triumphal dance.
Yeah.
I think that is quite nice, them going up that way, lights.
The sounds of the orchestra are lost in the sounds of the autoroutes, and the cast try to lose themselves after yet another hectic session. 4 of the corps ballet, trying to get away from the smell of the grease paint and the roar of the crowd, repaired to a nearby swimming pool. It was no accident that it also happened to be at the Film Cruise Hotel. The sun, water, and Riviera breeze were very welcome. Back at the theatre, however, there was more trouble. The harpsichordist, who had dismissed 3 page-turners in one day in his efforts to strike an artistically sympathetic chord with someone, couldn't get his instrument just where he wanted it.
Well, would you rather be just where it is now and just turn round?
That would be possible too. You see...
But look, this thing extends over the top.
Yes. I know.
Or would you rather be that way, where the television cameraman is?
It's all the same as long as I'm quite as close as convenient for you, so that I can see you easily.
It's fair to say, though, that we had to try a little harder to film at his exclusive poolside. Not for him the exposure of the piscine, no. The heat was pleasant, and John Copley wanted to be alone and away from the theatre. With the dress rehearsal and a French television recording only hours away, miracles were called for if they were to bring it off.
I think it's a terribly hard piece to bring off. I mean, it has a kind of, it's a classical work. It has a sort of static thing, which is dangerously, or can be dangerously boring. I mean, I would never talk about my colleagues' productions, but I have seen it when I've actually found it crashingly boring. But I know Janet, you know, we've worked together so happily on things like Stuardo and Werther, whatever, that I just know she's got that inner passion, which I feel is there in the music, and very often it's just not used. I mean, they pussyfoot about it.
When you first come in there.
Yes,
go on.
Aeneas do how royal fair shall I...
It's shall I, isn't it? It's not shall I, it's shall I impart, isn't it? Isn't that the
yes,
rhythm?
but I was... Yes, oh yeah, that's true, it is. But I was trying to...
How royal fair shall I impart? So use the L again,
yeah,
see through it rather than use the glottal.
Right,
okay. It matters
yes,
there.
all right, good.
It's a much stronger rhythm.
Yes, right, all right. Because I was trying to change the meaning of the phrase to shall I impart.
Shall I impart, yes. But it's shall
I impart, yes.
I think.
Yes.
See, one of the problems about working in the open air again is that you can only work at night. You can't light, for instance, until it's dark. So we've been up until 5 in the morning each night. We were terribly behind because the rigging was very late. We actually only had 4 hours to light the show. And then, of course, we've had 2 televisions. We've got the television tonight, and we had the first television last night. So we don't actually see our finished product until the premiere, which is very frightening, actually. It's a very alarming prospect. We really don't know exactly how it's going to look.
Well, we had the dress rehearsal last night, and I suppose one of the real problems we have is that we were not as ready as we should have been for a dress. Now we have very little time because we've got French television in, and the schedule is theirs. They work today, tonight, and tomorrow. And we can tidy up some of the things that weren't ready last night. But we've never really made up the lost time that we had on Thursday morning with the wagon being late. Having lost that time on Thursday, I could have asked my staff if they would be prepared to work a little extra, because we have a flexible agreement when it comes to foreign touring, which enables us to work much more easily within the terms of local agreements on the continent. But by the Thursday afternoon, in the heat, the immense heat that there has been down here, even if the staff had the energy to work, they would have in fact contributed very little because they were all dog-tired. That was in the middle of the afternoon, and most of them were scheduled on until the middle of the night.
After all-night working sessions, members of the company quickly realized that a dip was the answer to tiredness. The water was cool and the natives friendly. It made the aftermath of the first dress rehearsal seem more bearable.
Well, yesterday was our first rehearsal, and it was really quite hard work. Very, very warm in the evening, and especially the second rehearsal that we did from 9:30 onwards was in costume, and it was very, very hard work. Very long, hard rehearsal.
Not long to go now to a real audience. In the theatre, the dame and the director were trying to joke.
Stop that.
No, they'll probably be a great aeroplane when you say, "Riemann," then you can go up and say, "Riemann, Mommy." But you are.
I've got to go and get changed. I can't stand here. Come on, let's go and try
do the prop.
And while Dame Janet went to try on what John Copley called her frock, the minions of the court of Carthage were still struggling gamely to come to terms with those costumes. With little time to go now before the French television recording, it looked as if it might be easier to readjust the people than the costumes. The adjustable can only be altered so much. And the time comes when it's expediency, not art, that rules the day.
What happens is, it's up there. As soon as they breathe the thing or something, it just slips down. That's what happens.
By now, the opera machine was beginning to gather its own momentum. The proceedings were becoming glossy, and the glossy opera mains began to gather, many of them at a reception given for British Arts Minister Lord Donaldson, a celebration of the British at Aix.
We've got, I suppose, our greatest English artist, Dame Janet Baker, and we have the Scottish Opera and the Scottish Chamber Orchestra performing Dido and Aeneas, and it's going to be a marvellous performance under our Australian conductor, Charlie McKerris. So the whole thing is, from the point of view of the British Empire, an absolutely marvellous performance, and we're terribly pleased. But from the point of view of Scotland, I think their contribution to this particular thing is very high indeed. And when I look back, I mean, I'm old enough, I regret to say, to remember when there was no Scottish opera. I remember when we sent Percy Hemmings up from Sadler's Wells to take charge of what was going to be Scottish opera. And I've seen this develop all along, and it's developed marvellously. It's been one of the great success stories in Scotland. And the orchestra is fine, and the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, which actually I haven't heard before, last night played absolutely superbly. So I was very proud indeed, as Minister of the Arts for the United Kingdom, to be allowed to boast in this way in front of our French colleagues.
J'ai vu 2 fois l'Idoménée. I saw the twice Idoménée.
We do that again next year.
Terrible. Preaching is awful.
One might love it in France.
So, you will be there.
I'd very much like to see that again.
Get him on there.
And all these lovely little narrow streets and the courtyard.
And color of the stone.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
Yes. Beautiful, beautiful. And you see very interesting people, of course.
Yes.
Marvelous faces, marvelous expressions.
Because it's a bit different. We imagine they don't see them as we do. But I think human beings at any age have the capacity to feel deeply. They express it.
Sure, but I'm not sure that all the implications that we can feel now with our 20th century mind.
Handel must have felt it. Or
Sure,
it would not be there.
it would.
Therefore, if one man...
But the others, no, the others not.
Whenever I come to this part of the world, people say, well, you related to the Germans or no, you know. And I always say yes, rather chillily. You know, people have been quite nice about that.
Where are you in fact?
Very remote.
Very remote. That was the most
It was an
macabre
awful story. Yes. It was a terrible little plan thing, because the son actually did the murder, but the father took the rap for it.
Yes. Jane, of course, was spoiled. Jane's in Glasgow. I had a lovely big house. I bought one here. Even in Bath. I mean, look what a fantastic heart Bath must have had to write the emotion into his music. He was not a dry intellectual. He was a very deeply feeling human being.
The cocktails became champagne. The conversation became conversazione. And the paying guests arrived.
I've just been reading your news in French, which is very well represented.
They're on news tonight.
Yeah, the paper they give
Scottish
it to people.
Scottish Opera, they have a...
Very nice.
And so the first night actually went ahead. To the onlooker, it was a marvelous thing. There was also a certain smug satisfaction in viewing the public arrive. Dressed to the nines and paying £22, they'd come to enjoy themselves. The air was balmy, the champagne cool at £1 a glass. The audience had come to pay homage at the shrine. In the end, the press of Europe were to give Scottish Opera's Dido a mixed reception. But the consensus was very favourable. It had been a long slog from the old engineers' halls in Glasgow to the Archbishop's palace in Aix-en-Provence. But the audience, as is their right, had only to walk in and applaud. They did. And already the players were thinking of another opening of yet another show.
Well, we're just keeping our fingers crossed. I trust in the Dane totally. There's nothing like a Dane.